Dragon Age, the Veilguard obviously has blown up in every possible way. It's selling incredibly well. It knocked Call of Duty off the top spot on Steam, which is cool. I feel like the last time that happened was Elden Ring. The idea that Call of Duty is this impossible to tackle thing. I like seeing Dragon Age do so well. I was going to potentially do spoilers up to Act 1. I'm not actually through Act 1. Because it's in like 3, they call them acts. It's like 3 main chapters, and there's acts within those chapters.
Yes.
I'm on like part 7, let's say.
Interesting.
I think there's 14 arcs in the first chapter.
Yes.
Are you much further, without spoilers necessarily? I fought a dragon.
I have not fought a dragon.
Okay.
I am about 8.
Have you seen a dragon?
No.
Really?
Well, a dragon flew at me right in the start,
There you go.
and then he flew off.
Yes.
I am about 8 hours in, but you know me, Scott, I've been doing all the side missions, so I don't think I'll be as far as you in the main story. The last thing I did last night was recruit a guy with long hair who has a sort of...
Larry?
Have you done this? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I recruited him. I have done the mission at the docks with Nev. And
love with Nev.
those are the are the 2 main missions that I've done, and then I've explored some of the areas in the crossroads. So I'm very, very early days in the story.
So I'm trying to do, I just have a free-form chat about this because I think obviously the game is all over the place in terms of, the reception I think is incredibly positive. Like I said, it's selling very well. It's mostly positive on Steam. A lot of people have very positive things to say about it. However, it isn't perfect. It is more of, there are some negatives to it. At least I'll get to them. I'll get to some bits and pieces that I don't love about it.
Yeah.
I guess one thing I don't love about it is the exploration. Like, I think that I wanted to mop stuff up. And it's like the optional objectives that I have at the minute are like, go fight these optional bosses. But they don't tell you on the quest page the level requirements. So like, you're like chasing down these big beasts that are optional. You get there and like, I'm like level 14 now and it's level 25.
Oh,
so I'm like, okay, classic RPG scenario. If you're fighting a thing, it does its standard attack and it wipes you out. And I'm like, okay, splash damage got me again. Okay, let me try again. And I'm just not supposed to be there yet. And so I kind of wish the UI was a bit better in that regard. I have a few issues with certain ways that the game like handles its inventory, like different shoulder button stuff.
The inventory in the UI is mad in this game.
It's a bit messy.
Did you get caught up with the appearance on, appearance off situation?
Kind of. And it's like until you like start toggling whether you want the helmet to show, and then you've got the appearance to override your armor as well. And then once you've done that, then you get the toggle in the inventory, but it's not there before. It's more just like jumping between your companions and then their skill trees.
Yeah.
Their skill trees aren't in the skill page overall. That's yours. And so like I think that's a little bit cumbersome in terms of like L1, R1 is the main page hop, and then L2, R2 is like your companions. Just things like that to get used to. But overall, my main negative kind of thing is just exploration. Like there's so many markers on the map in terms of the objective markers, and I'm trying to do like the backstory of Solus. There's like 5 points that you can do that are for him, but then some of his markers, these optional bits of story, are in parts of the map that you don't have yet because you haven't done a main quest.
Yes.
And so sometimes the quest log tells you this isn't available yet. Other times you'll run all the way to where you would then go over a bridge and the bridge isn't there yet. And it's like, am I supposed to, is there another way to get there? Like, I think I've had a bit of confusion with that in the crossroads. And also just on the writing front, they throw so much nomenclature at you that I like this in a way because I like a good convoluted dumb lore and I like getting lost in the codex. But they keep throwing like, hey, you're in the Fade and it's the Volturi and the Canary and whatever. And I'm like, where am I? Like the lighthouse is a floating house that is like in the Fade, but it's also not accessible. And also there's elven doors that we're getting around, but no one else can use them, but Solus could. And Solus is in my head, but he's also in the Fade, and we're in the Fade. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, there's a lot to keep track of, isn't there? And, I've mentioned before, I'm not ride or die for Dragon Age. I've enjoyed the games that I've played, but if you asked me to recount the story of Inquisition, I probably couldn't. And not to mention the wider lore and the nomenclature like you've mentioned there. So yeah, it is a lot to take in. I think for me, and it's the way I kind of approach these games anyway, like a lot of that wider stuff, I try not to get too bogged down in. I'm just like going with the flow. I'm like, okay, the Fade is the Fade, and I'll figure that out when I need to. As long as I have like the main thrust of the story clear in my mind, which it is for me early on in chasing down these elven gods.
Super simple at the minute.
Super simple, 100%. But then fleshing out the companions, that's fine for me because I like talking to the companions. I like fleshing them out. I've done a kind of personal quest with Harding that was really cool, hanging out with her. But yeah, I would agree with you on the exploration that I don't mind it too much because it does give me that kind of mental check mark to come back later on when I am exploring and I see those locked doors and I kind of come up against maybe an enemy that is a higher level than me. I don't mind that too much because I'm finding enough along the way that still rewards the exploration in the moment. You know, I'm finding gold, I'm finding new items, new weapons, new armor and stuff. So I don't really mind when I hit a roadblock at the end of it. But I'm hoping that it starts to open up at a certain point because even right now, again, very early days, very early on in the story, the game doesn't want me to explore, and I'm coming up against that, and it's tough for me because it's against my nature to not explore. But I'm in like these main missions, like those two that I mentioned, and they're very much we're going to introduce you to these hub areas, I imagine, but you're not going to get to talk to anyone. There's going to be a lot of routes that are inaccessible. You are just supposed to follow the main story, which is fine, but it's kind of, I don't know, at this moment in time, I'm struggling to know what it's going to be when it does open up. Is it going to be more exploration heavy? Is it going to be more play driven? Or is it going to keep to a certain level of linearity that it is now? And I'm fine with that. It's just, it's figuring out what the game is as I go.
Yeah, and I think we messaged each other when we did the intro. I think the intro is incredibly strong. And it does feel like it is obviously the fourth installment in an ongoing saga. So you are stepping into what ostensibly feels like the climax of something. We are carrying on directly from the end of Inquisition and like certain choices that were made towards the character of Solus then. And so I like that feeling of like, we're hitting the ground running, we're going for it. And I think they nail the intro. And then they kind of fall back a little bit. And you've got like a couple of areas that are just, there's a gold chest at the end of a whole path and there's some platforming sections. And it's like, okay, I can see why people now bounced off this. And then you keep going and things open up a little bit more. You get more companions and you get a little bit more of like the conversational side of a BioWare game where you're getting to know the companions, you're checking in with people. And that's when it starts to click a lot more. And then I really like where I'm at the minute. But it is that weird mix. And you mentioned linearity before. Like the game itself was retrofitted from a live service from a few years ago. And Jason Schreier did a really good Bloomberg report on how most of this came together in the last 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And I feel like you can tell. Like I don't think they don't feel like live service arena maps that have been retrofitted. They still do feel like single player maps, but they're very small. There are bits when you go back to Minrathous, you can choose to go back to like the what do you call it? The big city. I forget the name of it in terms of how it's classified. But you can go back there, and there are more options to explore. The map is a bit terrible. Like it's like you don't even like until you stumble upon an alleyway, then it'll fill it out in the map. So it's like it looks like everything is locked off, but you have way more space than you think. But things like merchants don't show up on the mini-map. Like you'll only notice you can trade when you walk up to someone and they have the symbol on them, and then you can trade with them. And it's like, that's a weird beat. And like your crafting at the lighthouse at the HQ doesn't show up on the map. You have to find the spot in the lighthouse. And it's like, that's weird.
Am I going mad? Have I just got different settings than you? Because I was going to complain, actually, that too much is on the minimap.
Okay.
Because I don't know why, but that is popping up for me. And
that'd be hilarious if I've just got it. I mean, I haven't changed anything, but
like, also for me, it pops up with chests when a chest is nearby, which I quite like, so you don't miss stuff.
You equip something for that, or you turn it on or something. I did that.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay, right, okay. Because the
like
chests kept popping up on the mini-map, and I kind of thought, that is cool to know, like, I can comb all the areas, but at the same time, it kind of doesn't ruin the sense of discovery or exploration, but it means like I'm always looking at the mini-map and not looking at the world because I'm thinking, oh, there's a chest nearby. Right. I need to find the area for it. But that's interesting because, I don't know, maybe I'm misremembering, but the mini-map seems almost too populated for me, which is hilarious.
There
I don't
are
know what
bits
I've
and
changed
pieces
there.
like that, but when I was exploring Minrathous and I was walking through different like merchant areas and trading. It's in Treviso as well. It wasn't on the mini-map. I was just walking up to dudes and I was like, oh, I can trade with you. Oh, sure, okay, I'll take some bits and pieces of decor for the home base and things like that. But as the story rolls out, and I'll not do any story specifics, but you are replaying chunks of those levels in the exact same way that you did.
Yeah.
Like you go through, just because of the pace at the very beginning of the game, like you're jumping on a zip line and sliding down a thing and then going to a dude. You do that chunk again for a different reason. And it's like, I can see how you had to reuse assets for this. The thing is, though, I think the game is absolutely gorgeous. Like, it's the art style is weird. Just when I think I'm loving it, they throw a character at me that looks really stupid, and it's like it either looks like some kind of half measure between like Fable and like Pixar, which I can kind of go for. I like how otherworldly it feels, and it feels like you're looking into another world. But then other times it looks like when people apply those Pixar AI filters to real life, and they just like certain NPCs have like massive eyes, and they just look really weird and a bit too goofy.
Right.
At least in terms of certain people that I've found anyway. For the most part, it's solid. And to get my other negative out the way, certain beats of the writing are that standard MCU modern style of writing that is like, does not fit. I mean, I don't mind it if you can choose, because you can ignore most of it. You can just choose to not have those dialogue options. But then there's a lot of, there's a handful of bits where my rook is still saying stuff that is like, she like literally was like, well, this is awkward. And I was like, well, that's not how I'm playing you. Like, that's not how I'm picking your dialogue. Like, you're not the quirky, you know, like that stuff doesn't make sense. And I think it's interesting. I'm going on loads here, but I think it's interesting thinking about where BioWare were as a company, and then the transition when EA bought them, and then Mass Effect 3 was like, we're dialing back the amount of choices that you can make, and we're giving you a Shepard a bit more, and then you'll pick in between. And playing as Rook feels like that. Feels like Shepard in Mass Effect 3, where you're not picking everything. You pick enough to craft them, but every now and then there'll just be an interaction where I'm like, well, that doesn't fit.
Yeah, 100%. I don't mind that. I prefer the dialogue in Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2, but I playing through 3 again, massively very nice. Playing through 3 again with the Legendary Edition, I did kind of appreciate that BioWare was crafting more of a Shepard that was distinct. Like, for better or worse, I thought it was the first time that Shepard felt like an actual character. Like, I kind of understood the personality behind them, why they were doing what they were doing. They weren't as much of a blank slate, and I don't really mind that in RPGs. Like, I think Geralt is like one of the best RPG characters, and that is kind of a conversation between the developer and the player. I think you get way more control over who Geralt is and his kind of, I don't know, even ideology to a certain extent in The Witcher than here, because you are kind of playing within a more limited sandbox in terms of your choices, at least at this early junction with Rook. Like, again, similarly, I had a moment where Rook just started spouting these puns while we were out and about, and I thought, I kind of wish I had a choice in the matter to do this, but I think this is, again, more of that conversation between the developers and the player with shaping the character in a more limited framework, which I don't hate, because they are trying to tell a more focused story this time around. And I think the story that they are telling, at least from a presentational standpoint, is like so well directed. Like you mentioned before, like the intro is so confident. Like the opening scene with you and Varric in the bar, I got into this cool brawl. Yeah. And it was just so well animated. It was so well directed in a way that, honestly, I don't think past BioWare games have been. Like, I love the Mass Effect trilogy, but there are some wonky animations in there.
There's a brawl in Andromeda that's abysmal.
Exactly,
like,
right.
It's literally just unfinished.
Yeah. In here, I thought, wow, you've kind of stepped it up. Like you said, I really like the art design. It is stylized. It is exaggerated. It's cohered for me at this moment in time, and that comes from someone who was a bit wary of it in the trailers, who wasn't sure about it.
It works way better in the game when you're controlling it. Like, overall, I really like the art style. It's got me putting my purple and blue lights on when I'm playing in the house.
Nice.
And I do overall really like it, especially my main Rook and the main companions.
Yeah.
Like, but just certain NPCs just look look weird. They look too stretched or something. And like, they just look like Pixar characters. They look like I said, AI filters. Yeah.
I think that intro, right? I want to talk about that for a bit before I address your other negatives.
Totally.
But that intro was so surprising, because I'd seen the only real sentiment that I'd seen before playing was that it takes a few hours to get into it, and it does. You are right that it pairs back after that intro, but that first hour or so is so confident, and it's kind of like, for me, it was the inversion of Star Wars Outlaws. You remember when we were going into Star Wars Outlaws and we saw that trailer that we've talked about before, the gameplay trailer with the Sarlacc, and we thought, why are you showing off this mission?
That fetch quest.
When we started out the Veilguard, and it was the gameplay mission from a few months ago where you're in the kind of city and the city's under siege essentially, and the Fade is, tearing open things in the sky. I kind of thought, oh, that looks it looks all right. It looks like a little bit wonky. But playing it and having that be the opening mission, it was way, way better in context, I thought, and I enjoyed it so much more, even though I had seen it. And that culminates in a really good scene with Solus that, again, is really well directed, has so much punch to it. And then you get the title card, and it's like, oh my God. Yeah. I think BioWare is back. And that's when I opened my phone to message you, just to realize I had a message from you waiting for me about the exact same thing. But then you are right. I think perhaps by necessity it pairs back, then it starts being more linear in ways. It starts introducing you to the lighthouse, to the codex, gives you more conversations. And at this moment in time, it's funny thinking about the levels because
I should really clarify that, because that what you just said there was exactly what I want from a BioWare game. I love checking in with the companions and having those conversations. It's just the layout of some of those levels, and the ones you get hit with straight after the opening are some of the worst ones, because it's not the crossroads and it's not the bigger version of Minrathous or Treviso.
This is what I was going to say. Yeah, then you get to the levels, which do initially, I think, seem like really small, really linear, kind of almost Witcher 2-esque, I think, in terms of having a little bit to explore, but not all that much really. And even the loot system, the map reminds me of that game, which is kind of good because I like The Witcher 2. But yeah, it's very constricted, it's very small, and you kind of think, this is much linear than I was expecting. You don't really get that much choice in the first few levels, I don't think, in terms of what you're doing, even how your rook is. But now I am starting to see it open up again. And like I said, I went back to the crossroads and there was way more to explore. The maps were way bigger than I thought they were. I'm getting way more loot, way more optional objectives. So I'm hoping it continues down that,
that's so funny,
trends down that way.
Because I'm, like I said, I'm further in the main story, but I'm trying to do all the side stuff. I keep getting level locked. I'll just come up against the boss that's 25, level 20, I'm just not enough. I'll fight them anyway to try, then I'll lose and whatever. But in terms of optional objectives, I've got 4 different gates that I can go try and unlock, but 2 of them are level gated. 2 of them it just says wait till later in the story. And then I've got the solar stuff to do, which is a 5-point memory thing that I can do for his story. And there's one other thing that I have, but that's all I've got for optional stuff.
Interesting.
And it's I am running around, but I use stumbling upon triggers that then go into your quest log, and then I just haven't found anything.
Yeah, to get the biggest optional area I've had so far is going back to the forest that you kind of start the game in after the title drop. And there's a huge area there that you can explore. And it took me this was before I did the final main mission, I guess, to recruit another companion. And to get that, I had to go and talk to Harding. And I talked to Harding, and then we went to the forest again. And then there were a bunch of different exclamation marks around that forest for other quests. So that one kept extending out, which I was really appreciative of. So I think it's just a case of, it's every time you go back to the lighthouse, I'm checking to see if anyone has new dialogue, and they've got either an exclamation point above the head, which I think means a quest, or they've got a timer above their head as well. Because some things are time sensitive, so I'm just making sure I do all of those. And so far, they're pushing me in the direction of these larger areas, and it cascades into a bunch of different quests when you start one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I didn't cause I felt like I had no impetus to go back to the forest. I just didn't do it. I guess you can go on the local map and then the world map and then just fast travel around everywhere. But I didn't go backwards, quote unquote. I just sort of tried to explore the crossroads, came up against those bits where I couldn't go any further. And I felt like you did, where I was well, it's kind of telling me to do the main story, so I'll just keep doing that. And then I've done a couple of optional objectives in Treviso. But a lot of that just boiled down to go fight this optional beast or whatever, but then it's too high a level. So I just keep doing the main story missions, and which I like the companions so far. It's been fun, and I think I want to talk about the we'll get to the combat in a sec, but overall, I guess if you've not done that many main quests, you might not feel this yet or feel it at all. But the quest length is very short. And which is fine.
We are so funny. We are so funny, Scott. Sorry, I'll let you finish before I jump in.
So when I'm doing a lot of the main quests, there's been a bunch of them that have been 10 minutes, if that. And I quite like that each one is beam into Treviso, do a thing, beam into Minrathous, do a thing, beam into this other biome and do a thing. And it's it's character focused, there's banter, you're interacting with certain characters. And sometimes little moral quandaries that come up. I think some of them could be handled a lot better, because it almost ends up like the end of God of War Ragnarok, where every character is just slightly off screen. And I had that a couple of times where I'm resolving a political dispute, and then all of a sudden the guy that was the rival of the dude I'm talking to just walks in, even though we're in the middle of a battlefield or something, and it all just resolves there and then. I think that some of that stuff can be a little bit too neat. But yeah, the overall quest length is it feels really, really short, and it's you're rattling through these, it's a mix of combat and dialogue and story beats and whatever. However, so far I do feel like it works in its favor, flavor because it gives it this grandiose, like globe-trotting, world-hopping style.
Yeah.
That is like adjacent to like a blockbuster, like a Hollywood blockbuster. It's like James Bond is going to nip from country to country doing bits and pieces. Mission Impossible, Fast and the Furious, and I'm like, I get it. If that's what you're going for, I get it.
Yeah.
I think it's paired off against how much they just had to retrofit these maps and take slices of them and do like a bit of story here and a bit of story here, because it is so fundamentally retrofitted and rebolted back together from a live service mold. And I feel like I can see that, but I'm still impressed with what they're doing.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. I need to talk through this because that is interesting.
Well, you've had really meaty quests.
Again, I'm further behind in the story than you, but yeah, the last two that I did, I felt like were really meaty. I keep forgetting his name. What is the name of the guy who you're going for? Who's got a demon in him, and I remember.
I just got him last night.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier. It begins with an L.
I think it's like. Well, the guy with the demon in him is like Davrik or something. Oh no, it's
not. No.
Davrik's the guy that I just got last night.
Right.
It's like Lyric or something.
Yeah, I'll just call him Demon Man for now. I'm so sorry to the Dragon Age heads.
while we're talking.
Yeah.
And it just gave me some big spoiler thing. And I was like,
no.
So I'm sure I know everyone will be getting annoyed in the comments and stuff in online, but I think it's Lyric, but I'm probably wrong.
Okay,
Adam Strong just put a hit on us.
I know Adam Strong. I'm so sorry. Anyway, the point is that mission where you go and free him, and you need to kill his mark and free him from the prison and destroy the blood.
It is Lucanus.
Yeah.
Yes.
That mission, I thought that was meatier than I was expecting compared to the other quests. Like that was a full-on, I think it's like a double location essentially.
Yes.
And I loved the idea of this underwater prison. I thought it was really cool. I thought the enemies were really cool.
That quest has definitely been the exception.
Right.
Like,
okay.
Most of them have been a lot tighter. Sorry. Yeah.
No. Yeah. So I've had that one, and then I had the big side quest thread that I mentioned, and that took a few hours as well, fully exploring that area and doing everything within it. So I thought, I guess this isn't the case, but I thought that was the way the game was trending. It was starting to open up. It was starting to give me these bigger dungeons to explore. That might not be the case again very early on, but it's interesting if that is the exception, because I was liking that. It felt meaty. It felt like this game reminds me so much of Baldur's Gate 3, which, you know, obviously they were in development at the same time, so it's just a huge coincidence, but it's hard not to, I don't know, even being in the underwater prison, it's hard not to think of that mission in Baldur's Gate 3 where you're also bursting someone out of an underwater prison, which kicks ass. But yeah, I'm interested to see how that goes, because everything so far seems like they're teasing more open areas, especially, like I said, when you're going to these hubs, and there's people that I can't talk to yet. There's areas that are cordoned off, even in the crossroads, and I'm wondering at what pace do they start freeing that stuff up? Is it going to be drip fed, or is it going to be like after Act 1, maybe it's like, boom, you can go wherever, I don't know.
Maybe, where I'm at, it's still, I mean, it's a mix of different quest types as well, because some of them are like, you talk to Nev and she's like, oh, we need to go back to Minrathous and do something. So it's like, pop back in, do that. That's like a 5-10 minute thing. And then walk back out again. It's just, like I said, it's just been a bit of a scattershot thing. And because in the back of my mind, I'm like, I feel like I can see the strings, or I can see the stitching, stitching it together. And like I said, it's not that it's not impressive, but I feel like you can see, the thing is, like, overall, it feels incredibly confident. I love how, especially at the beginning, like that opening brawl scene was great. And then like, I love, like, I don't know how many people would have chosen to do this. In the moment, it felt like I customized it, but I think you don't have as many options as I thought. But Rook catching the bottle that's going to be thrown and like nutting the person, and I was like, this feels great. There's so much confidence in that whole intro. And this feels like a really confident BioWare, which, like, I think obviously the development was still a mess, but like they did bring it together in a way that they didn't with Anthem and Andromeda. And I still feel that confidence there. It's just confident craftspeople using like an incredible set of tools with materials that were like stitched and hobbled together and rags from a bin that they were then able to sort of like try and make a quilt with. It's
interesting, right? Because I'm excited if we ever get a proper deep dive into the exact developmental changes, because you are right, that cool, that's a strange way to describe a report. That cool
it's trendy.
Jason Schreier Bloomberg article at the weekend was enlightening, you know. That said, it started off as a single player game, then it became a live service game, then, like you said, it pivoted in the last 3.5 years, and then went back to a single player game. And it's not that you can't see the live service elements that could have been, but I'm not seeing the stitching, I don't think, as much as you. I can definitely see where the RPG elements have been pared back in a way, and I can see where the game has become more action-oriented. Like, I think it feels good to play, and I know we're going to get to the combat. It's got a great jump button, which I love to see in any game. And you can
got a good dodge as well.
good dodge. And you can see where it has kind of become more focused on combat in that way. But yeah, I'm not at this moment in time looking at it as I'm not saying you are, but like a compromise between two different visions. No. I can probably understand that a lot of assets were reused because even though it had 3.5 years as a single player game, that's not too much time in the modern climate anyway. So I'm sure they recycled stuff. I'm sure they retrofitted stuff. It's just, like you said, impressive how confident it feels despite how messy we know it was behind the scenes.
I think it's a mix of stuff. It's like, some of it's the environmental exploration where you just like, it's just like we've just randomly put a giant chest at the end of this like pathway or whatever it is, or a handful of items to find that I imagine would have come from a larger loot pool if they'd stayed as a long-term live service game. Some of it's that environmental feel. Some of it is the UI design, which is still kind of coming out of that character customization online screen with the mouse cursor and that kind of stuff. And then other bits are like ways that they reuse parts of the maps and pathing through those maps, and the way that the enemy variety isn't that varied, like over time kind of thing. Bits and pieces, but like I said, overall I'm having a blast with it. I find that it is just incredibly playable. And a lot of that comes down to the combat. But it's like, okay, one more mission, one more conversation. Let me just do one more bit of the story. And a little bit more. And like, it's the first game that I've played till like 2 a.m. in ages. Most of this year, to be honest. And I just could not put it down. And we can talk about the combat because I think a big part of it is the combat. And I know that a lot of the naysayers have bounced off the combat. I really like it. Like, what's your class?
I just went for a warrior.
Cool, I'm a rogue.
I went for it for a really silly reason. It's because when I was hovering over the rogue option, my rook was like doing this weird smug grin that I didn't like, and I thought I don't want her to be doing that all the way through the game. So that's the silly reason why I went warrior in the end.
But yeah, the combat. I mean, people are making comparisons to God of War. I don't see that because I think God of War is way more Soulsian, like in terms of like you're turtling around certain enemies, you're locking on a hell of a lot more. This is way more like a hack and slash. Like you can lock on. And you can dance around certain enemies if you want to, but you can also take on 5-6 dudes at once. Like there are big group encounters, and you can just cleave through them with like big area of effect spells and things like that.
We are playing different games at a certain point. Scott, what difficulty are you on?
Whatever the default one is, normal. Whatever the middle one is.
I'm playing on the one below. I think it's Nightmare, right? Where it's like we advise against this. And playing on this difficulty, it's not hard. I haven't died yet, but it requires way more one-on-one gameplay. It requires way more use of your companion's abilities, and I would get absolutely mashed if I tried to like just hack and slash my way through because you don't get much health on this mode that I'm playing.
High difficulty it'll force you into playing like that.
I just think it's interesting that there is maybe a more tactical edge to it, and that's maybe where the Soulsy, God of War comparisons are coming from, because as a warrior anyway, like my R2 ability, the ranged attack is to throw my shield kind of God of War style, like you can do in that game, like when you throw the axe or you throw the shield or whatever it is. So I'm kind of doing that. I am locking on. I am turtling around enemies. I am using all of the abilities to charge an attack and then detonate the attack with a different move. And it's requiring kind of more thought and more finesse, which I'm really enjoying. And I think maybe that's why it's taken me a bit longer to get through it as well, because those encounters are quite tough. And even though I'm not dying a lot, the enemies have a lot of health, and I'm having to extend a lot of the combat encounters to make sure I can keep my health topped up and keep on top of all of the different waves of enemies. But that's really interesting that you can play it as a more extravagant hack and slasher with the area of effect attacks and taking on a bunch of enemies at once.
Yeah, also because I'm a rogue, like I don't know if the warrior has the double dodge.
Yes.
So it's like you can keep on the move a hell of a lot, and it's like I am like feathering a lock on like a Souls game, focusing on an enemy, de-locking, getting around. It's just a lot of the encounters that I've done are against multiple enemies. So it is like almost Yakuza style, like going from like enemy to enemy to enemy, and then occasionally locking on. Because they introduce finishers, which is the same animation every time, which kind of sucks. I was a bit disappointed by that, and maybe it changes later on. But every enemy, whether it's big or small, has been the same finishing animation. And then they bring in their detonators and primers and detonators. The idea of like priming a certain element and then detonating it. And most of the time, there's only been one of them available. Even between like I've switched companion combos quite a lot, but the combos only really match up. I guess you could really go into the menu systems and make it so you had more options available to you. But I'm not thinking with that much in mind.
Right.
Like and the high difficulties will probably push me towards that, or would push me towards that. But most of the time, it's like. I could argue that I don't even need the companion abilities. Like I am mashing through dudes, and then if I'm fighting one of those really high level enemies, I'll do a combo thing, or throw my own combo thing into it. But as a rogue, like I'm keeping on the move loads. You can also extend the dodge by tapping the right trigger. I don't know if you can do this as a warrior.
Ooh, I don't think so.
But if you do a double dodge and then tap the trigger, you do like an extra spin and fire an arrow off, which feels very cool.
Yeah.
And it has like an auto target thing. So there are little bits of flair like that. Like there's a lot of flair to this Dragon Age, and I'm really liking that. I know that the wider fandom has a lot of issues with the tone changes.
Yes.
And a lot of the consistency and like, portrayals of race, for example, in terms of how in depth it was in the previous games.
Right.
But all that like level of flair and the art style, I can go with that because I'm not as embedded in the history of the series. But yeah, like the way that I'm playing it is this like really over the top, almost cosplay fantasy game.
Nice.
Which is working for me. But
I can only echo kind of what you've said there. I think the combat is very playable. In fact, it's probably the first BioWare RPG I've played since maybe Mass Effect 3 where I've wanted more combat. And when I'm just walking through the forest, I'm thinking I'm kind of itching to use those abilities, right? I think it's striking a nice balance for me where I am having to think about like what enemies I'm going up against, what kind of protection they have. Like some enemies have armor, some have a barrier, and different moves are more effective against those different protective measures than others. So for instance, the barrier, I'm pretty sure it's my ranged attacks. I throw my shield, that takes out a huge chunk, then I can prime them, then I can detonate them. And my warrior has this kind of drop kick essentially, which is so satisfying to use, Scott. And it acts as a detonator for one of my companions, so she can prime it. I can come in with me big boots, and then they explode, and it is very satisfying. Like you said, there's a lot of flair to it.
That's cool.
I would like a few more finishing animations, but I've managed to find at least a few. I don't know what the rogue secondary weapon is, but
just there's double daggers and double swords and bow and arrow.
Right, so the warrior, if you press down on the D-pad, you get a two-handed weapon that does a lot of stagger damage, and you can attack like multiple enemies in a row. And I essentially have this big Harley Quinn style hammer, two-handed hammer, and then you can like knock folk about with that, smash them on the head and stuff, which is a nice change of pace from the stabby animations. So I'm getting a decent amount out of that, and I'm hoping that it again only fleshes out a bit more when I get more companions, when I upgrade their skills, get more of those primers, get more of those detonators, and it's striking a nice balance for me between that more tactical and methodical approach that I know Dragon Age especially is more known for, and that immediate flair, I feel like I'm on top of the world and I'm a god stomping on ants action approach. So I'm just, like you said, very playable. Combine that with the exploration and the constant rewards I seem to be getting from chests or whatever it is, and it's definitely scratching that itch of I just kind of want to keep playing. I want to do one more mission, one more side mission, explore this alleyway, you know.
I do, to round this all off for now, because we'll keep revisiting it. Obviously, we're playing through it at the minute, but I do think it's fascinating thinking back on BioWare's history and like looking at the Neverwinter Nights, the Knights of the Old Republic, that initial pivot towards action with like a third-person action with like Mass Effect, and they got Mass Effect 2 is like the sweet spot between the two. Mass Effect 3, it's a little bit more over the top. It's a little bit less player agency. And then obviously, that's part of EA's acquisition. And then you've got the real full pivot into live service stuff. And none of that stuff worked. And now it's like we're trying to get back to where we were as a team, as a studio, but then trying to take some of the lessons from the action era, if we call it that, across the 2010s. And I think they found a really fun spot. Like, this is a really good melee brawler. Like this, or you can make it harder and make it more of like a combat, make it more proficient. And it's like, I like that there's no one else really doing this, in terms of like this really sort of like party-focused, companion-based story. Obviously Baldur's Gate, but in terms of the action, it's interesting seeing both games be in development alongside each other. Baldur's comes out and it's like pen and paper RPG, turn-based. You're thinking about everything 3 steps in advance. This comes out and it's hack and slash. It's pausing for a second to prime an explosion. It's whatever, and it's interesting the idea of like going forward. They put a statement out saying that we're all all hands on Mass Effect going forward, like trying, because the best part about Andromeda was the combat.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can see, these are satisfying combat mechanics. If you can pair that with more in-depth RPG mechanics, like, then you're off to the races.
I've seen people, compare it to Mass Effect 2, both in terms of the story structure and the combat, and rightly so. The combat, even those primers and detonators, it's probably in Dragon Age 2, but that's straight out of Mass Effect with like the different abilities you have. You can levitate someone in that game and then smash them with a projectile, and it kind of does that nice explosion of damage. And this feels like a continuation of that, or at least an adaptation of that. Even like the inability to control your party members directly but control their powers reminds me of Mass Effect. The levels remind me of Mass Effect. The companion focus reminds me of Mass Effect. And as a Mass Effect guy, that doesn't bother me. That's
all
like
the Dragon Age fans are screaming that stuff was in Dragon Age first, but actually I guess it wasn't, because Mass Effect predates the first Dragon Age, but near enough.
Does it? I thought Dragon Age Origins... It was Dragon Age Origins after Mass Effect 1.
I'm pretty sure Origins was 2009, unless I'm getting my gamer cred wrong.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. But it makes me confident for the next Mass Effect. I was looking at that project with trepidation. I love the original trilogy. I didn't know if they were going to be able to get it right. And after even playing 10 hours, 8 hours, or whatever it is of this game, I'm thinking, you might be able to do something special. I do have a few notes before we move on.
Yes.
One, I want more dialogue in the game. I don't like that it doesn't have the Dragon Age or Mass Effect thing of just being able to go up and talk to anyone, even if they have nothing to say. It's context specific at this moment in time. You'll get, like I said earlier, a little icon above their head on the map that says they have conversations available, but I would like to just be able to talk to them whenever I wanted, kind of like when you're on the Normandy in Mass Effect again, and you could just go up to people and just see if they've got new stuff to tell you. Also, just two final minor notes. Two options that I immediately switched off. One, the cursor in the menu. Gone. Be gone. And two, damage numbers. Be gone.
Motion blur can get in the bin as well.
Interesting. I've kept that on for now, but I might experiment.
I did get rid of it. There's a vignette option as well. There's a lot of stylistic stuff in here.
Yeah.
I feel like there was an era where Netflix had, like the rebooted Sabrina show had a vignette approach to it. And there was another sort of young adult show that had like a vignette thing around the border.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, and then I feel like it went away because darkening most of the screen just kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But this still has that. And it's like, there are those elements in here that are just sort of like the how do you do fellow kids type stuff. But I think for the most part, it lands on the right side of charm and intent, and I do think overall that, like I said, there's a confidence to it, and I do want to play more. I hope there's more to the story.
Yes.
I hope it's not just stop the evil people. Because they're already teasing the roles of religion and conversations around religion and things like that. So we'll see. There was one scene where they showed the two gods talking, a couple of gods talking to each other, and their conversation was very just, "We're so evil, aren't we? we're gonna be evil. Like, what if we do this? We'll be even more evil." And I was like, okay, like it's not that previous BioWare games haven't done that.
Yeah.
But I really hope there's more to it if we're gonna do like a sort of 50-hour RPG.
I think that is probably the distinction between something like a Mass Effect and a Dragon Age, because to me, like that, even that style of writing and that structure of the story has been, again, Mass Effect 2, which is not even my favorite in terms of the story. I prefer Mass Effect 1 in like the conversations with Sovereign or whatever it is. But 2 was very much, here are the collectors who are nameless, faceless bad guys, essentially. And the story is about like the companions. So I'm going to be interested to see how this one shakes out, whether it does have that wider narrative satisfaction, that people, Dragon Age fans, are rightly wanting because of this, how long they've waited for Solas' story and how not indebted, but how much they love the lore of the previous games and how much they connect. But it's going to be interesting to see whether it satisfies on that level or if it is a more vignette, ironically, approach to the storytelling that makes it successful.
I really want like extremely in-depth videos on the like consistent. That's not necessarily the consistency of tone, but the consistency of depth to the writing.
Yeah.
Like this is how old BioWare was tackling X subject matter, and this is how Veilguard tackles it. And looking at the different team changes over the years. Like BioWare is such a retrofitted studio at this point, or have been through so much. Like I still think there's enough old BioWare in there, but it is fascinating paired off against, like I said, the action era of the 2010s.
Yeah.
What do you take from that era when it was so roundly hated? I mean, they almost went under, trying to sort of however those conversations went, but the stuff that it seemed like EA wanted them to do.
Yeah.
But then other insider reports pointing to BioWare heads wanting that action stuff as well.